This is Yusef, and what I want to do is I want to read some comments from somebody who had remarked on my video of the discrimination against Italian Americans. And as you know, I'm not Serbian. I may have Italian blood in me since I have ancestry from, I usually say Argentina, Syria, and Ireland, but there's some family in Colombia too, but I just say Argentina, it's easier. But many Argentinians have Italian blood. Now, I don't know of any Italian blood in my family. And I stand up for Serbians because I believe they are wronged, or they have been wronged, and I think that a minority in America which gets passed over and just used as a caricature lately, and not only lately but for the past over the past 100 years, has been the Italian Americans. And I would like to read these comments to you, and it comes from my video speaking out against discrimination and racism against Italian Americans. And forgive me if I get this order wrong, and this is from StatenIzzy1. And he says, I agree with a lot of stuff that you say, man. You're educated like me, and that whole Columbus segment you said was great. And it made me think of the American government has something against us Italians. There was a black president before an Italian American, and probably will never be an Italian American president. In my view is brainwashed Italians should stop considering themselves white when they never truly had the white American privileges. And he says, you feel me, especially my family being dark-skinned, which I agree with this. Italians are not white. They're not Hispanic, but they are Latino. And as I said, that the Latin, if we're talking about the Latin race, and not the Hispanic Latino ethnicity or culture, the Latins are the people from Italy who had colonized the Iberian Peninsula and pushed the Celts up into Ireland and Britain. And you can see, I mean, to try to tell the difference between Spaniard and Italian is extremely hard. Just by looking at them. The Portuguese have more of the Germanic blood since the Visigoths had come down, and we know that Italy had gotten, you know, a lot of its genetics through the barbarian invasions, the Vandals, the Visigoths, the Huns, the Franks, the Lombards, the Normans, the Vikings. But continuing with his comments, because I asked him if I could read these, and he said yes. He said, don't get me wrong, because there are so many asshole Italian Americans. Well, no, I don't think that's the beginning of, because he has four comments on here. He says, great video, thanks. I'm Italian, and it's crazy how they underplay the Italian racism, and it was completely forgotten about. All we hear is black, black, black. I heard stories from the early 1900s that were signs, that there were signs in the windows of New York City saying we don't hire Italians. This is true. This is true. And the black people in America did go through hardships. I don't want to deny that, and I do not think this person is denying that at all. But the fact that the white community can just say, oh, well, we feel sorry for the blacks, therefore we can be racist to other people, and when I mean white Anglo-Saxons. He said, look at Disney. Look in Lady and the Tramp and Pinocchio. They show the Italian guys as loud, dark-skinned, curly hair, big noses, singing in a broken accent. We've gotten so much hatred, and it still goes on today. but it's all cool for some reason. But if I say anything about a black, I am immediately a racist. Even what you said about the shirt was a good point. I said, oh, he goes on this, Dago tea and Guinea tea is still used today, but many like it's nothing. I think he means to say many people use it like it's nothing. Imagine me saying, let me put on a, and these are his words, let me put on a nigger shirt. I think this is a concern of Italian Americans, that there's a double standard. And yes, I think Dago tea is disgusting. Guinea tea is disgusting. Dago tea and Guinea tea, meaning the which some people would call wife beater, which I think is, again, is an allusion to, you know, Italian Americans beating their wives, and you know, it's not just being like some hillbilly thing. He said, don't get me wrong, because there are so many asshole Italian Americans where I live in New York, but I want to let people know that Italians are hardworking people, and most still are, but we came here with nothing and were discriminated against, which made it harder, and many changed their names because it was too ethnic, and we did need the mafia to help us get rights because the mafia was powerful at the time. Now, as much as I despise the mafia, and I don't like it, at its beginnings, since the Irish had come here before the Italians, the Irish wound up being the heads of the fire departments and the police, the police departments. That's why, you know, kind of that stereotype of the Irish cop, and the Irish had experienced things similar early on. Many people say the Mexicans are the new Irish because the Irish would come in very Catholic, would have large families, would, you know, gang culture in Irish Americans was very big. The 40 Thieves, the Dead Rabbits, and they fought against gangs that comically called themselves the Native Americans, even though they were white Anglo-Saxon Protestants. They weren't actually, you know, Cherokee or Navajo. And yeah, I think Italian Americans, you often run into somebody who says they're Italian and they have blonde hair and blue eyes, and then you find out that they're 3/4 Polish. Yeah, I don't consider Italians white. They may be white under American law, because American law says that if you're from Europe, any part of Europe, the Middle East, or North Africa, you're white. But even if you look at Italians, Italians are generally have darker skin than Spaniards, Portuguese, Turks, definitely Turks. They have darker skin than Syrians. They have darker skin than Egyptians. I saw this very kind of racist channel. I actually voted on one of the videos, and then they were claiming that the Italians were Jews, or that the Italians were this sub-race, and that they weren't really white, and that they shouldn't be considered European. Well, there are people that come from a Mediterranean climate, and there's been that myth, oh, the Moors came in and raped the Italians and brought in black or African genes, which is actually foolish, and DNA has disproven this. Italians traditionally do have the big nose, are very hairy, which are not traits of the Africans, and that ancient Italy is always portrayed, even into the Renaissance, is always portrayed with these very Germanic people, small noses, you know, blonde hair or orange hair, all this kind of stuff, and they all have these sweeping English accents. Well, when Rome was at the height of its glory, the German people were living in mud huts and eating dog, and the Saxons were not in Britain, they were in Denmark and Sweden. Um, and yes, the Italians got the shaft. In fact, I had to do a book report when I was in school, and I found out that in New Orleans, Italians got paid less than blacks. Um, and that's just a fact, because the Italians, when the white Americans saw the Italians, they saw these dark-skinned people that didn't have any of the same facial or racial features as them, spoke a foreign language, were very Catholic, even though Louisiana had been considered a kind of a Catholic state, or at least the southern part of Louisiana was. Um, Although it was French, and we know French are, if we're talking about racially, the majority is the Franks. They're Germans, even though they have somewhat of a Romance language, nothing compared to Italian, Spanish, Portuguese. And I've heard many people say, "Oh, well, the real descendants of Rome are from Romania." Well, Romania, they had the influx of Slavs, so most of those people are from Slavic descent. They're not Germanic or Italic, Latino. That's why when you're talking about Latinos, it's the Hispanic countries in Central and South America. It's also Brazil, because Brazil is not Hispanic, and it's Portugal and Italy. Those are the Latin peoples. The Latin homeland, the motherland where the Latins come from, is a central part of Italy. And we know that Sicily and Kingdom of Two Sicilies, living down there, are primarily Greek, and some across the eastern shore, right across from Albania, have majority of Greek descent. But I think if you look at Super Mario Brothers, Mario and Luigi being plumbers with the big thick mustaches and overalls, that wouldn't fly with any other ethnicity. You wouldn't have Little Black Sambo doing that or anything like that. I'm not trying to diminish any of the horrible racism against black Americans. But even there was a study done by the NIAF, and one of them was hiring, and she didn't have an Italian last name because she had married a white guy, for lack of a better term, with either an English or Swedish last name, and they passed over all the Italian all the people with Italian last names who were to go there, who were registering to try to get into, I believe it was Harvard or Yale, and they passed them over. And Hollywood perpetuates the worst stereotype of Jerseylicious, the Jersey Shore, Jersey housewives, and whenever you see movies about Italian Americans, it's heavily laden with the mafia, of the later mafia. Now, the mafia, to begin with, was basically protection of the neighborhood from outside influences, and the Jews had organizations like this, the Italians, the Poles, the Irish, everybody kind of had their organizations like this, but the mafia had grown. Now, I will not watch a mafia movie. I think they're disgusting. I think it's a slam on the Italian American people. I will not watch Jersey Shore. And I think it's a great thing that the Italians basically kicked out Snooki, or whatever her name was, from Italy, and said she's not welcome back. When you look at the Italian contributions to technology, to the West, to America, it's been very great. The Italians were very patriotic, and yet the Italians were put into internment camps, concentration camps, not death camps like in Germany, but they were put in internment camps because they were seen as enemies of the state during World War II. And many of them were sectioned off to Ellis Island. Many of them were deported. and they were the last to be let out. The Germans and the Japanese were let out, but the Italians were kept around. I think this is something that needs to be brought to light. This is just one video that I've made, and it was at the permission of the man who left the comments. Peace to you. May God save Serbia and Syria, and I think we need to recognize the wrong that it was done against Italian Americans, whether we were Italian or not. And Ireland, but there's some family in Colombia too, but I'd say Argentina, it's easier. But many Argentinians have Italian blood now. I don't know of any Italian blood in my family. And I stand up for Serbians because I believe they are wronged, or they have been wronged, and I think that a minority in America which gets this is Yusef, and what I want to do is I want to read some comments from somebody who had remarked on my video, the discrimination against Italian Americans. And as you know, I'm not Serbian. I may have Italian blood in me since I have ancestry from, I usually say Argentina, Syria, order wrong, and this is from StatenIzzy1. And he says, I agree with a lot of stuff that you say, man. You're educated like me, and that whole Columbus segment you said was great. And it made me think of the American government has something against us Italians. There was a black president before an Italian American, and probably will never be an Italian American president. In my view is brainwashed Italians should stop considering themselves white when they never truly had the white American privileges. And he says, you feel me, especially my family being dark-skinned, which I agree with this. Italians are not white. They're not Hispanic, but they are Latino. And as I said, that the Latin, if we're talking about the Latin race, and not the Hispanic Latino, passed over and just used as a caricature lately, and not only lately, but for the past over the past 100 years, has been the Italian Americans. And I would like to read these comments to you, and it comes from my video, Speaking Out Against Discrimination and Racism Against Italian Americans. And forgive me if I get this